Well, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. This is a podcast where we explore thoughts in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. Today I have another special guest with me, Dr. Camden Bucey. We're going to be talking all sorts of Reformed stuff, so that's going to be great. And Lord willing, we'll get into some Karl Rahner, which is not Reformed, but you'll see. I'm really excited for this guest. Just wanted to give a shout out to the Patreon supporters, everyone over on YouTube. All you guys, appreciate the support. If you like this podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts, give me a 5-star review, and leave us a comment. But enough selling myself here. Let's bring Camden in. Camden, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, man.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thanks for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to talking. Watch some episodes in preparation. I'm really digging it. I don't know if I've ever said that phrase before, but that's how I feel at the moment.
That's awesome. Well, dude, I've been listening to Reform Forum for years, so this is an honor to have you on. For those who don't know, man, so you're executive director of Reform Forum. That's a great place. If anyone's listening right now, like go check that out. But what is it for people who don't know?
Well, it started as just a hobby with some friends of mine when I moved to Philadelphia back in 2007 to start at Westminster Seminary. I met up with some friends, made some new friends, and we started having what I thought were interesting conversations that my former self would have appreciated listening to, because I didn't have a whole lot of Reformed influence or anyone really, a whole lot of folks to talk to, certainly not from a confessionally Reformed standpoint. So podcasts were very early on, but I used to work in the tech space at Caterpillar down in Peoria, Illinois. And so I always had my fingers in some tech stuff, and I listened to tech podcasts, and I thought, hey, I've got some microphones. It'd be interesting to record some conversations and put them out for other people who might not be able to talk about these things. So we started as a podcast back in January 2008 was the first episode we put out.
Wow.
And since then we've incorporated as a nonprofit back in 2010, April Fool's Day of all days. Some of the people might not like what we do, would find that appropriate.
Yeah.
But we're a nonprofit organization seeking to advance Christian education. Our mission comes from Colossians 1:28. We are seeking to support the church in presenting every person mature in Christ. And the way that we do that is through podcasts, books, other publications, online resources, events, online courses that we have. But they're all coming from decidedly kind of a theological tradition and an homage to Gerhardus Voss's biblical theology and Cornelius Van Till's approach to revelational epistemology and apologetics. So we don't view those two guys as saints any more than anyone else is a saint, the general office of a believer. But we are greatly indebted to their theological contributions, and we believe that they teach what the system of doctrine that's contained within Scripture most faithfully. So those are our guys, and we're trying to do theology and following in their footsteps.
I love that. That's awesome. Well, so you worked at CAT down here in Peoria. Are you from Illinois originally?
Yeah.
Good. All right, man.
Maybe the only reason I'm still here. I know it's not the ideal situation. Our state has been having a tough time the last 5-10 years.
Yeah.
And but I grew up just south of Rockford, so in a small town named Stillman Valley, Illinois.
Sure. Yeah, I know Stillman Valley. Yeah.
There you go. Where did you grow up? Maybe
I grew up in out in Lombard, right next to Wheaton, the old promised land there.
Yeah, man. And absolutely.
Yeah.
Not too far away.
Yeah.
Stillman is a tiny town. When I was there, the population was about 850. The population can't be more than 12 or 1,300 at the moment, but I still find some pride in the fact that there are no stoplights still to this day.
Right.
And still, but we have at one point had 3 or 4 pubs, and we do have curbs, but no stoplights. So small town. That's my upbringing.
Well, I know all the random towns in Illinois because of wrestling. You just hear people's names. You hear these towns. And, oh yeah, sure, I know that. And I went to NIU, so out that way. And
I had a lot of friends that went to NIU.
Yeah.
Some relatives too. I didn't make it there, but Stillman always had a holiday invitational. My dad was a wrestler. I didn't wrestle I wrestled from 4th grade up until freshman year of high school, and that's the one thing I quit. I quit freshman year wrestling. I couldn't handle it psychologically because I was a freshman, but it wasn't the wrestling that I couldn't handle. It was the coach was a banker, and so practices were at 7:30 p.m.
Oh, nice.
So we used to have to go to school, then go home, and then come back, and then go
brutal.
home. And it was too much because I played baseball and football as well, and it just needed that break. And once that coach left, and years later, it just never got back on. So it's kind of a regret in my life because wrestling is such an underappreciated sport. And I think you learn so much just about physiology and even physics and leverage and all that sort of thing that
totally.
I love wrestling. I still go to meets and watch and try to get my kids into it. But, it's one of those things I think doesn't get appreciated and mentioned that much. So here's our apologetic for wrestling.
This is the best, man. This is the best podcast already. Yeah, this is great. I was just thinking about the other day, man, there's some countries where, wrestling's their main sport. And you go to Mongolia and you go through like a traffic stop. I went to Mongolia on a trip with Athletes in Action, and they have like still some kind of corruption. Sorry, Mongolians out there, love you guys, but there's still some corruption, some corrupt traffic stops. But all you do is you show them your cauliflower ear, and they're like, "Yeah, okay," and they let you through because you're a wrestler. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of pride in that. People look at that as some gross deformity, but among wrestlers and folks that are into jiu-jitsu and whatnot, that's a badge of honor and you wear that proud.
Yeah, that's right, man. I love that. This is great. Well, getting back to Reform Forum, dude, when you started, you said that it's just you and a couple of friends. Do you have any idea that this would become you'd be the executive director? This would be your full-time gig. Any idea about that?
No, it's surreal. We didn't start anything with that intent. We honestly were just appreciating talking to folks, and there was nothing like this at the time. Things existed on the radio. The White Horse Inn's very well known. Renewing Your Mind from Ligonier and R.C. Sproul's ministry was obviously a big deal, but there wasn't anything, to my knowledge, that was more hitting a kind of a seminary audience or even beyond. And so as much as I'm indebted to White Horse Inn and Ligonier and appreciative of them at the time when I'd gotten to seminary, we're looking for and trying to chew on some stuff that's a little past the adult Sunday school level. Right. But that also got me into more of Voss and Van Tillian variety of things. And Ligonier is not shy at all about, some of their folks are a little bit interested in Van Til, but generally speaking, throughout the years, they've been quite opposed to the apologetic tack of Van Til. Even more recently, Keith Matheson published a piece in Table Talk that was,
a whole tome. Maybe. That thing was long. Yeah,
it is what it is. Yeah. And, so it's a different thing. So I love to join hands and support what they're doing there, but we had no idea. We were just trying to fill a niche. We were scratching our own itch, to be honest. Yeah. And then it turned into people listening. And then wasn't a few months later, we started to ask other people to come on the program as a guest, and it just kept going. We just kept doing it every week, and it grew. And then it got to the point where we had to figure out what we're going to do with it in the sense of, this is becoming enough work. We got to and maybe requiring certain expenses in terms of hosting, in terms of maybe needing some equipment here and there. Not a lot, but we got to the point where we saw it was wise perhaps to incorporate as a 501c3, and that was a whole other thing, and requires a whole lot of other infrastructure. Right. And then it's been a surprise. It's been a wild ride. We're really excited about the things we got in store coming out, and just trying to fill in a gap where we see there's a need, and so long as people are blessed and continue to benefit, we'll keep doing what we do. Yeah, amen, I have no idea what the Lord's got in store, but as long as he keeps giving us work to do, I'm happy to do it. And we're just at it, with that mindset. Yeah.
Dude, I've been so blessed by a lot of the podcast episodes. And anything on Boving's been so great, all of them. But I'm trying to think like what. So other people classically, radio programs, and then you think of podcast, and it's like, well, anyone can have a podcast in their basement. I'm in my office here. Right. Was that ever weird for you to talk about? Like, I'm running this podcast. Did you ever feel like a sense of like, we're down here, or Or
Oh,
how
yeah.
do you think? Yeah, how do you think through like what the podcast is, the
I
medium
still
even?
deal with that, in the sense of people, have a very confused look on their face when they find out what I do, or if I visit a church, if I'm doing pulpit supply somewhere, and they say,
Yeah.
"So what, you do a podcast?" At
Right.
least now people know the word.
Right.
But even a few years ago, people had no clue what it was. And, the simplest thing is basically to say it's like an internet radio show. It's on
Right.
demand, whatever. Even that is a bit confusing to folks, but there still is kind of this disdain, I guess, or some, I don't know if people intend it, but recently I got one, which was, "So what do you do this podcast?" And yeah, you do that full time. It's like, well, you do other things too, and that you're busy all week. I'm like, yeah, I got more work than I can manage, with all the stuff going on at the organization, but it's just confusing to folks.
Yeah.
So it's changed over time. It's become a little more culturally known. It's not as strange, but
Yeah.
there's still this flavor of you're weird. It's this, there's this sensation or this thought that it's not serious, or that it's that it's somehow, a subclass type of thing to do,
Yeah.
or what. It's just strange.
Yeah.
And people don't know, I guess, that the power of it in the sense of its effectiveness. It's a strange medium, and there's a lot of value in it, for the same reason people like talk radio. You get to know the people, but it's an odd form of information transmission and learning. And it's not learning in the sense of going to a classroom and having a lecture or reading a book, obviously,
Mhm.
discursive that way, but in the sense of you learn through conversation and picking things up.
Yeah.
So I listen to a ton of podcasts myself
Yeah.
on a
Same.
wide range of things. Partly why I'm attracted to your particular program is just the potpourri kind of nature of it.
Mhm.
That's fun, because
Yeah.
that's how we learn. That's how we talk. It's how we discuss. You bounce around, and then you start to find odd connections between things.
Mhm.
And in a way, you're kind of enlightened by that, by finding the serendipity and the surprise in being a curious person. I think
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I'm just a curious person.
Yeah.
And, Lord's called me to gospel ministry, but my curiosity, although it's mostly focused in theology, it's in all sorts of
Right.
wild stuff. And I appreciate this renaissance of media, because it allows curious folks like us to be exposed to things we maybe never
Yes.
would have even had an opportunity to see before.
Yeah, dude, amen to that. And I think, speaking of, ministering the gospel, being curious is some of the best way to do that. So someone comes up to you and is like, "Yeah, I work at Caterpillar." Like, "Oh, dude, what do you work on?" Like
Right.
I know a little bit about that, and you just go in on different things. And even if you know nothing, if you're curious, you can ask them good questions and get somewhere. And one of the great things about Van Til and that flavor of theology is looking at everything as an argument for God. Everything presupposes God. Everything's connected because it's God's world. Looking at the organic motif, anything like that, like it's all interconnected. And so my goal, I can get that back to God. And I don't want to be manipulative in the conversation, but
Right.
being naturally curious and being a Christian, it's going to go back there.
Amen. That's
Yeah.
exactly my thought and attraction to Van Til to begin with, because it is, in a sense, a comprehensive understanding of the world. And so when Van Til's talking about a worldview, that's what he is getting at. He's not speaking of it from the idealist
Right.
notion, or even a postmodern perspective.
Mhm.
And so there are a lot of critics of Van Til that have a knee-jerk reaction to the word worldview.
Mhm.
But for Van Til, it just has to do with the fact that the triune God of the Bible has created and continues to sustain the world,
Mhm.
and that any fact, any true thing, any existent, anything in the world is sustained by God, and God knows all those things.
Yeah.
He has comprehensive knowledge. And we come to know those things by thinking God's thoughts after him, but yet as creatures. So everything we know, everything we encounter, everything we discover in the world is already known and sustained by the Lord. We can't learn things he doesn't already know.
Yeah.
And we think after him, and therefore there's an ethics to knowledge. There's always a covenantal dimension to knowledge in the sense that we're related to God. And it's just it's a liberating way to approach apologetics, because you don't have to get somebody on your train of thought regarding some line of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to get them to care about some syllogism, in terms of like the classical approach of the 5 ways. But you find out where they are. You find a point of contact ultimately in the image of God. And if you're talking to a human, you have a point of contact.
That's right. Yeah.
And then you work from whatever they know or whatever they care about.
Yeah.
And you can, like you say, find your way to God, because everything is connected to him.
Yeah.
I just love that approach. And that's really at the heart of what Van Til is getting at.
Yeah.
I don't understand why people are so opposed to that.
Dude,
why
I was just going to say, man, I had one of my guests, I won't name him, but we were talking afterwards, and they're like, yeah, there's kind of a Van Til derangement syndrome. And it's true. You just hear Van Til and you go off, and it's like, well, have you read Van Til? And they go, no, but I've read some things about him. Like, well,
I read some quotes here out of context.
Yeah. And it's like, look, I know you can't read everything. I haven't read all the church dogmatics of Barth, and I don't like him, but you should read something, or at least talk to someone who's pro Van Til, before you make this conclusion. I've talked to Bardians all day, and derangement syndrome, man.
No, there are real differences that people have different approaches. I don't mean to say that Van Til encompasses all the different approaches and if everyone actually read him and understood him, that they would agree. They wouldn't. No, that's just life.
Right.
But at the same time, I agree that often the Van Til people despise is not what Van Til was trying to say.
Yeah.
But also maybe Van Til wasn't always the best writer in every place. But I think if you read him on his own terms, and he's just tremendous.
Yeah.
Everyone can learn something from him. We don't have to hate the guy.
Right. Dude, seriously. Well, one of my favorite things about Reformed Forum is I wanted to ask you about your audience, like who you think your audience is. But when I read a book and I'm very excited about it, I'll read some Voss, I'll read some Van Til, I'll read some Bavinck, and there's no one to talk about it with. What do we think about this? And then I go on to Reform Forum, and you got a podcast episode where you're interviewing the author, and it's like I get to be in that. And
that's the point.
Yeah, and it's like, that's finally great. Okay, someone to talk. Okay, yeah, so I'm not crazy. That is what he was saying. Or I didn't think that. And I think of with Reform Forum, there's this meme, what it's like to listen to podcasts, and there's this kid eating ice cream, and he's sitting next to a poster of girls laughing on an ad. Have you seen this one where he's like laughing as if he's in the ad with them, but he's not? It's like, I feel like I'm part of the crew here, but this is our first time meeting. But that's something that's been so helpful. With that in mind, though, who is your audience? Because you are going deeper than the popular level. Let's bring all the cookies down. But where are you at? What's your conception of like your audience for Reform Forum?
That's in some ways kind of a difficult question. I appreciate it. And it's something that we frequently ask ourselves and discuss as a faculty or as a board, the folks here. To begin with, I would say that our audience is not defined by theological ability or education to begin with. That comes into who we seek to address first, just as in terms of a pragmatic aspect. Let me explain. So we do hit a seminary and post-seminary audience. So the people that listen to Christ the Center, for example, are typically fairly highly theologically educated, and they're good readers, and they're learned in that way. And so it does stretch beyond the typical adult Sunday school level that many other organizations are targeting. But that doesn't mean those are the only people we want to address. That's just a matter of chronology. It's because there was nobody serving those people in the Reform space when we began that we ended up growing. So our flagship program, Christ the Center, that podcast, tends toward that group because that's just how it has been.
Yeah.
But we are seeking to do other things for other people. A lot of our online courses are targeted towards adult Sunday school level. And we have a, kind of a roadmap, what I call kind of a knowledge map in terms of what we want to fill out. And if you think about it in terms of a matrix or a graph across the x-axis, we might have all the different theological topics or categories: church history, systematics, apologetics, New Testament, Old Testament, all that stuff. And then you can think of, on the vertical axis, the y-axis ability level. And that can go all the way from postdoc all the way down to, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds.
Yeah.
I'd love to have resources for everybody, but it's going to take time to get there.
Right.
So we're kind of hitting our niche at the moment and slowly trying to branch out. But here's to answer the bigger question. So who is the audience? For us, it's obviously folks that want to learn and go deeper in their knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. But we're seeking to do so, again, from the theological standpoint of a reformed biblical theology, a redemptive historical approach to Scripture, as evidenced and exemplified by Gerhardus Voss. We're trying to develop that. And then also the thoroughgoing epistemology and approach to apologetics and defense of the faith. But it's really just a comprehensive understanding of humanity in relation to God, the covenantal theology of Cornelius Van Til. So as long as people are interested and learning and coming to see how that theology is flowing forth from Scripture, then those are the people we're seeking to serve, whether they're 3 years old or a postdoc. But not everyone's going to like that. It's not every dispensationalist is going to appreciate or be convinced by our arguments or our theology. We understand that, but we're seeking to present every person mature in Christ, understanding that's the church's task. We're seeking to support the church in that task. And we believe that to be mature in Christ, you should know these things. Yeah. So we want to take people from cradle to grave insofar as we're able to, as servants in God's kingdom, supporting the church and helping people to know Jesus better. So it's kind of, in a sense, what everyone's trying to do in terms of discipleship. You're trying to get people to know their Savior better. And how do we know how we're supposed to do that? It's from the Bible. Yeah. We just believe that the Voss and Van Til are two really good examples of teaching what the Bible teaches. Yeah, man. I love that. It's so cool to see how it's a movement and how it's grown, how God's blessed it, and how Christ the Center had this audience, but now you guys are branching out and you got classes on Van Til, you got different courses going on, reading groups with Voss. It's been awesome. It's been awesome to see, and it's really cool that man, you're like the pod father, because you were like 2 years before Joe Rogan started. Isn't that wild? Yeah, I'm waiting for my Spotify deal. But
that's right. Soon. Yeah, after this one, maybe.
I mean, I'd even take like a Four Sigmatic or Onnit sponsorship at this point, whatever. I want some of those kettlebells he has with the gorilla heads.
Dude, seriously, they're like $1,000. They're so expensive. Yeah. Well, so one thing that's I'm sure you probably wouldn't say this because you're so humble and stuff, but when you interview people, but you have your own interests as well, sometimes it could be frustrating. I'm not going to put that on you. For me, a little bit, where I want to be a contender. Like I got some ideas too. Let's talk. It's not just about you. And my guests are great, so my guests don't do that to me. But you have a doctorate. You have done your own work. You've thought through some stuff. And so I wanted to give you some time to talk through your ideas. You did this for Reformed Forum, but you did a lot of work on Karl Rahner. Yeah. And it's turned into a book in Great Thinkers. It's not showing up. There we go. Karl Rahner, Great Thinkers. And dude, I was so excited when I heard your interview. Was it Tipton? Someone interviewed you on the podcast.
Kind of. They kind of turned the tables on me a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah. But you'd said something that struck a chord with me, because when I first heard about Rahner, I was like, dude, I don't know about Rahner. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
And then I heard him talk about transcendental language. Like, let's go, let's see this. And then I found out what he meant by it, and I was like, dang it. And it was kind of the same kind of thing as you, or at least what you said in the podcast. So, man, how'd you get into Karl Rahner?
That's a great story, I think. Maybe because it's my biography, but before I get into that, there's always a temptation, just to connect a few dots for folks, because we're talking about the medium of the podcast. Number one, there's always a temptation for people who have ideas to share those ideas. So, I'll be the first to confess, you always want to be humble. And when you're having a guest on, let them speak and restrain yourself. Like, that's always a battle for folks that enjoy conversation. That's the nature. But if people are watching or listening to your podcast, then, they want your input to some point.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally we get critics that don't like how much I talk or the hosts talk, and they would prefer it to be more of an NPR interview where you ask a brief question and then let them run with it. I appreciate the desire for that, but that's not what a podcast is.
Right.
A podcast is a conversation.
Yes.
And so when I'm listening to Rogan, I listen maybe to once a month. I don't know. It depends on the guest for me.
Right. Totally.
Or whomever else. I'm dipping in to hear the guest interact with these people, if it's a panel or that podcast host. And so I just want to put that out there in the public. That's how I view a podcast. That's how I view a podcast.
Yes.
Other people might not view a podcast that way. That's fine. But in terms of the podcast we're trying to produce, that's what we think about them. Okay.
That's so great you brought up NPR, because that's why it is different than radio. It's not, I'm not putting on a suit right now, and I'm not just my 10 questions. And what do you think about, what's your favorite ice cream?
Sometimes those are not even recorded with the people. I don't know if people understand how radio works. Often syndicated radio or people like an NPR, where you might have an NPR station in various cities, the guest comes on and reads and gives answers to a predefined set of questions. Then the host in the various cities goes and reads the questions, and then the producer stitches the podcast or the interview together. So it's not in conversation, because it can't be a conversation. No. In those cases, because the two people actually never talk to each other.
Yeah, this is crazy.
It sounds like they did.
Yeah.
And that's just no good. You want to hear questions coming from certain people's points of view and certain people's experiences. So, if somebody's coming on Christ the Center, I'm going to ask some questions that arise from their book, but there are also questions that I have an interest in, or questions that might have arisen from my personal experience or my research.
Right.
And that's why I can also listen to the same guest on multiple podcasts, and hopefully it'll be a much different experience, and you learn new things each time. Yeah. There's a point to that. So I guess that's a little justification to repeat some of the Rahner stuff, even though we talked about it on the other podcast, because this is unique, because you're asking and we're having a conversation on this. Rahner was unknown to me, other than a brief reference in a distance course I took with a guy named Harvey Kahn. Harvey Kahn was deceased at the time I took this course. So I took a distance course through Westminster called Missionary Encounter with the World. And it was basically kind of a course on contextualization in missionary experience. But he was heavy on philosophy and history of ideas, which is what I appreciated about this particular course. And they mailed to me tapes, literal cassette tapes. And I had to dig up an old boombox, and then I exported the headphone jack into the computer and recorded it digitally, so I could listen on a more modern thing. But in there, he mentioned Karl Rahner and Rahner's Theology of the Anonymous Christian, because it's a huge factor in world religions and thinking about pluralism and inclusivism. Rahner's not a pluralist, but he's an inclusivist. And so is basically Roman Catholicism. Right. So I had only heard of Rahner from his anonymous Christianity. Excuse me. But when I attended seminary, you'd read about him here and there when you're interacting with the doctrine of the Trinity, because he's also big in that sphere.
Rahner's rule. Yeah.
Exactly. Which he didn't come up with, and he's the first to say in his book on the Trinity, but everyone ascribes it to him, and basically he's the popularizer of it. But it's the axiom that for him, what he says is the immanent Trinity is the economic Trinity, and vice versa. What he means in that regard is God in himself is the same God as he is for us. There's no difference. And in a sense, he's basically eternalizing the economy. We can get into that maybe in a minute, but it wasn't until the Doctrine of Christ class that was taught by Lane Tipton during my MDiv studies that he he had an assignment at the end of that course where we had to study a modern Christology. And if we wanted, on the final, we could replace, if I get this assignment correct, we could replace one of the essay questions with writing about this Christology. write a paper on it, or basically write, that would be the question for the final. So it makes sense that am I going to do an essay question I haven't seen, or one that I can prepare for?
Right.
So totally. Yeah. I read and studied on Karl Rahner, on his doctrine of Christ. And it was so fascinating to me, because when I was reading Rahner, he would ask the same questions that Cornelius Van Til would ask, and often use similar vocabulary, but he would come up with just diametrically opposed answers. And I kept wondering, like, how could this be? How could it be that the answers to these questions are just completely opposite, which that piqued my curiosity. And then the further I dug, the more I realized how influential Rahner was in modern Roman Catholicism. In fact, some people have even called him the Holy Ghost writer of Vatican II.
Yeah.
And if you know anything about Catholic history of the 20th century, Vatican II is, one of the biggest events, not just of the last century, but maybe the last few centuries, at least going back to 1879. And yet nobody from my Reformed circles, other than Robert Strimple, who taught at Westminster in Philadelphia and then moved out and taught at Westminster in Escondido, California, had ever dealt with him. And even Strimple hadn't published much, and so he'd done tremendous work on Rahner, but there'd been no sustained critiques. And so Lane, Dr. Tipton, encouraged me to look into that. And then as I had opportunity to continue on and go into doctoral studies, I figured he would be a convenient person to study, because not only is he such an influential figure, and not only is there really nobody that has dealt with him from my confessional standpoint, but also he's a very good figurehead or placeholder. So by addressing Rahner, you're not just addressing one figure.
Yeah.
You're through him able to access and to critique, by extension, all of, or at least an overwhelming majority of modern Roman Catholicism.
No, is that why I started there? Well, sorry, is that because of his influence, or because he? I would think it's because he was so influential, but maybe it's because he was a man of his time.
That's an amazing question. Nobody's asked me that question, so congratulations to you, Parker.
All right. Great.
I appreciate that, Pensées. But it's I wrestled with that, and the conclusion I came to, I have an appendix in my dissertation, which is not in the book.
Okay.
Partly because it's not that good, but my conclusion there is I think Rahner had significant influence on the assembly, the Vatican Council, but I think also he is just part of the milieu. Like, he is a man of his times. He is embodying that zeitgeist, and he happened to be somebody who put voice to what was going on. So there are many other theologians doing similar work as Rahner. So it's kind of chicken and egg.
Yeah.
And I think maybe, as most things, it's probably a bit of both, right?
Yeah.
It's not just all of one or all the other, but one way or the other, you could definitely see his fingerprints on the conclusions of the council.
Yeah.
Whether that's because people were reading Rahner or listening to Rahner and, being convinced by his writings, or it just so happened that they came to similar conclusions, and then he was the one who had his name on the books.
Right.
That maybe is a question for somebody that's beyond my pay grade. I don't know the history of the council well enough to say.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense, because if everyone was first council kind of theology, and then Rahner comes along, he probably is not convincing people, but because of the this is a word I picked up from Reformed phrase, because of his seats in Leben,
setting in life.
He was able to be more influential. I want to talk Rahner's rule, because that one comes up a lot, actually, at TEDS, and I want to talk transcendental stuff.
Okay.
But first, just maybe briefly, the anonymous Christian stuff, is that still going on? Is that still?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Well, let me explain it, because I think it's genius, but it's horrible. Okay. Number one, almost nothing in Rahner is going to be spiritually edifying. However, if you understand him and you get into the questions he's asking, then it is quite instructive, and it's, in a sense, motivating for us as as Protestants and confessional Protestants at that, particularly to realize that our theology should be addressing issues. Rahner is what's called kind of an occasional theologian or an occasional writer. So he has in his bibliography over 4,000 items to his credit. So his CV is insanely long.
Yeah.
But a lot of that is because he wrote occasionally, basically like the old formal version of a blogger. He would write a lot, what we would write as a blog. And imagine if you wrote a couple posts a week for 50 years, what your production might look like. He did that, except prior to the internet. So a lot of his stuff, it's all over the place. Thousands and thousands of short articles on a variety of topics.
Yeah.
But for him, in his case, they were published and now all collected. You can get them in his collected works, which you can find at any, Trinity's got them.
Yeah.
I do not own them. I'll receive a donation. If anyone wants to send me the same look of work, I'll take them.
Yeah.
But Rahner's whole theology, it's very, I find it to be organic. The Catholics really recoil if you say that Rahner is a systematic theologian.
Okay.
They don't like hearing that because in that regard, in the Catholic taxonomy, systematic theology or dogmatic theology has a very defined meaning and a defined approach with the way that you do theology.
Very
Rahner
formal, right?
Exactly. And traditional, there's a, set topics, set ways in which you write, set approach. And Rahner is none of that.
Okay.
He addresses those topics, but when I say he's very systematic, I don't mean that. I mean that his thought, though, is all connected.
Yeah.
And whenever you're looking at his anthropology or his theology proper, his ecclesiology, it all fits. It's congruent, organic from his standpoint, from his presuppositions. So the doctrine of the anonymous Christian flows forth from his theology of man, his anthropology, theological anthropology, and from his theology of revelation, and in a sense also his ecclesiology. But it's also connected to his theology proper. But the basic idea is that man, as made in the image of God, is like a radio in which God is always communicating himself. He's broadcasting on a frequency. And human beings are the unique creature that has the capacity to tune into that frequency and receive what God is sending out. So human beings everywhere all have this capacity, and all of them can tap into that frequency, whether or not they know where it's coming from or personally know with explicit knowledge where it's coming from or who's sending it. And so for Rahner, what God is communicating is not information, but he's actually communicating himself in a gracious self-communication. It's a gift of his own being, in a sense, of himself. And then there are people throughout the world who recognize that their limitations, their need, they stretch out towards the beyond, the horizon of their existence, and realize their utter dependency in the face of this mystery that is beyond their limitations. It's starting to sound very, new agey. Schleiermachian too. Yeah. Exactly. It is very Schleiermachian in that sense. But what they come to realize and receive in that moment is God himself, even though they might attribute it to Allah or to, the Hindu gods or to some form of atheism. Basically, Rahner would say that anyone out there can receive God's grace, in fact, does receive God's grace through the things that have been made. Because they're a human, they receive God's gift of himself, but not everyone does so explicitly or thematically. There can be people who are saved. In fact, he would say, I would imagine most, if not, an overwhelming majority of people, even in other world religions, are saved. They're saved by Jesus Christ, even if they don't know it. So that's the anonymous
Anonymous.
Christian, and that's the difference between pluralism and inclusivism.
Mhm.
The Roman Catholics are not pluralists. They don't believe that all proposed roads to salvation are equal. They would say, no, those religions are false religions. However, God meets and can bless the people by his grace in those other communities and contexts, even if they don't know where that grace is coming from. They're
Yeah.
mistaken that Allah is blessing them, but Jesus Christ nevertheless can meet them and save them through their ignorance.
It's a bit like the Last Battle, maybe, C.S. Lewis, and what you've done towards Tash, I'll attribute to me. It seems a little bit like that, right? And yeah, it kind of messes with the gospel, I think.
A lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess on a sliding scale, inclusivism is better than pluralism, but it's still contrary to the Bible. I mean, there are many people that will come to our Lord at the end of days and say, Lord, Lord, and he'll say, depart from me, I never knew you.
Right.
And those are people that are
literally saying Lord, Lord. Yeah. They're not anonymous. Yeah.
Right. And how many examples in other teaching of Scripture can we multiply to that effect? I mean, we don't need to get into all of it, but that it's just not what the Bible teaches.
Right.
And at the end of the day, where are we getting our understanding and our knowledge?
Yeah.
For many, it's, what do I feel? It's autobiographical. It's trying to be nice and kind. And could God really be so cruel as to judge, millions or billions of people?
Yeah. Well,
that's the problem.
Yeah, man. Just this is a finer point, and maybe Rahner hasn't thought through since he was an occasional theologian there.
Mm-hmm.
When you're receiving God, is there like a what are you receiving? It's not a relationship because it's anonymous. Is it like theosis? Are you receiving God's being? Or are you like becoming, or like what's going on there? Does he talk about that?
Well, that's in a sense what I'm trying to deal with in parts of the book, because I think this is a frontier, or at least there are questions to be answered. And these are kinds of things I'm trying to continue to study myself. And one hot topic lately is the doctrine of participation in the divine essence.
Everyone's talking about that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I'm doing a lot of reading, and a lot of my colleagues at Reformed Forum are also reading on that subject and trying to understand things from a Reformed confessional standpoint, and then to do so in light of, Thomas and others. Rahner was a Transcendental Thomist, perhaps not the best title, but all Catholics, of a type are forced to acknowledge the philosophy of Thomas, because he's been named the official philosopher of the Catholic Church. But then the Transcendental Thomists sought to kind of transcend the limitations of Thomism by reading it, in light of Kantian philosophy and other, Enlightenment philosophies, critical liberal philosophies. So it's not a question that I would like that I haven't found in Rahner as much explicit material on the beatific vision and theosis and interaction with, Eastern Orthodox theologies in particular, as much as I would like. I mean, he touches on these topics, but at the heart of his whole theological program is the idea that God is giving a gift of himself. And that's at the very center of the Trinity. It is what the Trinity is, because the Father, he's almost like a patricentric Trinitarian theologian and he's leaning a lot on the East in his way of his formulation of the Trinity. So the way I read him, and where I'm critical of Rahner specifically on this, is that the Father is, in a sense, he's not the only God, but he's mostly God. And then the Son and the Spirit are self-communications of the Father. And then, so God, specifically the Father, the unoriginate person of the Trinity, gives the gift of himself, but he gives it in a twofold way. And so his communication ultimately to mankind is the self-communication, but the mode by which that self-communication is transmitted is concrete, historical, and spiritual. Spirit in the world. It's Christ incarnate, but also the Holy Spirit. So Jesus in the flesh is a manifestation, like in a sense, the perfect manifestation of God's communication of himself in time and in space and history.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the Holy Spirit is also always present and active as a communication of the Father too. So is it theosis? That's a question perhaps to be investigated and developed in future works. I'd love to read. If guys want to write on that, I'd love to read it. Send it to me. Let's talk. But at the bare minimum, we are receiving the gift of Christ and the Spirit. And Rahner at times even likens this to a hypostatic union. So when we receive that, and it's all tied up also with the Catholic ecclesiology, because the church is the ongoing incarnation.
Yeah.
And insofar as we're in the church and related to the Pope, the vicar of Christ, the stand-in for the head of the church,
right,
we too are personally, hypostatically united to God.
Is that just in reference of being united with the church, or is that also participating in the elements as well?
The elements of
the sacraments.
Like the sacraments.
Yeah.
Oh, that's in there too.
Okay.
Yeah. You start to see how it's all connected. Yeah. When we partake of the Mass and that miracle, the Catholic understanding and the miracle of transubstantiation, certainly, you're not just, you're feeding on Christ, but literally on the substance.
Yeah.
And also then as a result being changed, transformed yourself and receiving, in a sense, I guess, the being of God. You're being divinized, deified, but not in a way that you would be some sort of competitor to God, or that you would ultimately merge with him so that there would never be any distinction between creator and creature.
Okay.
He would not want to say that, but it certainly borders on area that I'm very uncomfortable with in terms of our relationship. But that's why I always read and understand through the lens of a covenant theology, and through a reformed doctrine of the image of God, which is very different. Yeah.
Well, I'm starting to see, what you were talking about with a systematic thinker, and he seems like he's really smart, right? He seems like he's got
he's brilliant.
system, right? And I just would disagree. But going on with Rahner's rule, so what I've heard, and it depends on who you hear it from, right? I think there's a lot of different takes on what Rahner's rule is. Some people think it's right, some people think it's wrong. In my mind, it's like because Rahner he wanted us to actually know who God is. He wanted to say who God is in his actions is who God is in his being. And I wonder, was he contemporary with Barth? Because I wonder if he's reacting to Barth's kind of ineffability, that God is wholly other and unknowable except through Christ. Is there any exchange going on between those two?
He does interact with Barth, but it's typically on the doctrine of justification, and he's critical of Barth on what he would call a juridical notion. That's at least the translation. Rahner was writing in German.
Right.
But when I read the translations, he's always angry and opposed to a juridical notion of justification. He sees Barth as kind of an example Protestant. And I believe Barth interacted with Hans Küng on this point as well on justification. And so I haven't seen, doesn't mean it's not there, but I'm unaware of any extensive treatments of Rahner with Barth on the doctrine of God. But it's a similar point, and people are reading Rahner, in conversation with Barth as well. I would say the lightest version, the people that don't see Rahner's rule as big of a problem as I might, are reading it as purely an epistemological point.
Yeah.
Or even lighter than that. One might say, all Rahner is trying to argue is that we don't have two gods. The true God, who is in himself, is truly revealed in and through his economy, in his actions, in time and space. If that's all Rahner is saying, then why does he have a rule named after him?
Right.
Because nobody is seeking to demonstrate that we have two different gods in our Trinitarian theology. Now, a stronger point might be, well, the only way we can know God is through his actions and through his revelation, which is, in a sense, by definition, economy. Now, that's more along the Barthian lines, or in the Barthian discussion. Barth would go even much, much deeper than that in terms of his Christology.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't think those are. Rahner is saying both of those things.
Okay.
But I think he's saying something even much stronger. For him, there's no difference between, or distinction between, God immanently, with an A, God in himself, and God for us, because the Son and the Spirit, by definition, are always self-communications of the Father.
Yeah, it comes back to it. Yeah, right.
Exactly. So
Yep.
in God's own being, in himself, he is communicating himself always. That is who God is. And then in time and space, we just have a concrete historical manifestation of what God is in and of himself from all eternity. For me, this always begs the question, well, who or what is God communicating to prior to creation? You end up with begging the question of panentheism.
Yeah.
You know, is God dependent? Does he need creation in order for someone to receive this self-communication? And that's why I would love to see, and I see this in Van Til, a doctrine of the Trinity in which God is in mutual fellowship with himself among the persons of the Trinity, in no need of any other.
And then you have communication for eternity past. You have it there. You don't have to. He's not communicating to someone. He's communicating. The Father's communicating to the Son, by way of the Spirit, or the Spirit, or all three in communion. Because, well, this brings me to Tipton's autotheos. It's not Tipton's, right? But it comes from Calvin. And to me, the Rahner's kind of opens the door for eternal functional subordination, right? If the Trinity, in the ontological Trinity, the immanent Trinity, God in himself is exactly match for match the economic Trinity, how God acts for us, then the Son, he came and he was subordinate to the Father. Is he eternally subordinate to the Father? And then are they not, the Father up here and he's the original? And that's what it seems to me. I
agree. I think the same exact thing.
Okay.
I think this is where he leans heavily on Eastern theology, though, because there is a tradition within the Catholic Church, small c Catholic Church, the ecumenical tradition, that allows for this. And I don't think it's as biblical or as tight as it needs to be. And this is where I think Calvin is so helpful on the doctrine of autotheos. But when we start speaking of the communication of essence, of being, from Father, who communicates his being to Son, who then might communicate his being to Spirit, you end up with, and then there's the great debate over the schism in 1056 over the filioque, whether the Spirit also proceeds from the Son or not.
And the Son.
And the Son. So correction, we have from the Father to the Son, from the Father to the Spirit, but then the Western tradition also would say and the Son. So that, I misspoke there. So Rahner isn't trying to do anything outside the ecumenical tradition.
Okay.
Whether he does is another question, but that's the issue. He sees the being of God, of the Father, being communicated outwardly as Son, as Spirit. And then what we see in history in terms of his economy is just what God is in and of himself, which is why I think in a sense, it ends up eternalizing the economy, but it makes for what I think is kind of an unstable or a lacking, an incomplete Trinity, because there is this outward focus, but then no recipient until God creates man. And then as man, he can now be the divinely created recipient of what God has been seeking to communicate from all eternity.
I think that that is really a really good point. There's an argument I've been working on about this the same kind of thing, because if God is dependent on a receiver, if God's dependent on the radio to pick up his signals, then he has to create this radio in order to pick up his signals. He wants to, he must, if the economic Trinity is the immanent Trinity, he must share this signal with someone, and so then it makes creation necessary. It makes us necessary.
It does if God is somehow changed in that activity. I don't know what all different Rahnerians would say on that point.
Sure.
Like, is God different when people receive the message? I don't know. But they might respond to me in this regard and say, well, then why does God create in the first place at all? If God is complete in himself and has perfect, consummate, that's even a misnomer because there's no consummation. He just is perfection.
Right.
Perfected beatitude and glory within himself. Why is he bothered to create? Well, that's a great mystery. I don't have an answer to that, but it's in God's eternal counsel.
Yeah.
But I would much rather live with that mystery than a God who's lacking.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I don't know if this is the best transition, but I wanted to get into absolute personality a little bit, if we could. Because it's right here. We're talking Trinity stuff anyways. I got in a debate with my class yesterday on this, because we're talking about divine hiddenness, and somehow we got into God's personality. And there's the debate, and people were saying, God is three persons, and then God is personal. I said, well, if God's not a person, then stop saying he. Stop referring, unless you're saying I'm picking out the Father this time, or I'm picking out the Son, right? But we refer to him as he, and in Scripture he's done that himself. And so I'm not saying that God is one person and three persons the same manner, directly contradictory, but that's the mystery of the Trinity. And I'm not gonna come down on one side of the unity diversity debate, because it doesn't seem like he doesn't seem he's revealed that. I want to hold the equal ultimacy. And you wrote a piece in Poitras's Festschrift on this point, and talking about Islam. And so
I'm impressed that you know.
Dude,
that's amazing.
Well,
this is really near and dear to my heart. This topic. It's important.
Man, I used it in a paper that I wrote for Dr. Tom McCall last semester, and I couched it in some Bavinck language, because everyone's okay with Bavinck.
Exactly, which is so strange. People are so critical of Van Til on this point, but he gets most of all of his ideas on this from Bavinck, and they love Bavinck.
And I slip it in there, and they go, and then here's some Van Til as well. But I think Bavinck even uses the language of absolute personality. I'm pretty sure I found that in a couple of spots. I'm not sure if I quoted that or not, but and I was surprised because talking with Paul Maxwell about this, and he put me on to Tipton's dissertation, and Tipton finds the perichoresis from Hodge, but it's also the same language is also in Bavinck. He's also doing the same thing, and so I think
he's developed that. I mean, just to whet people's appetite, he's finalizing a manuscript. I just worked through it myself and sent it back to him. So that's a much improved, and not that his dissertation was bad, but a greatly revised and beefed up work should be out this year on this very topic. And a course.
The book is coming out.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I have a course in the can. It's on my to-do list today. I need to finish doing some color correction, but then very soon we'll have a whole course on Van Til's Trinitarian theology.
Dude, we've been waiting for it, man. This is going to be awesome.
I mean, it's right here. Like, this isn't talk. Like, like, we have the finished document. He's just reworking some stuff.
That's going to be huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right on this. And this is where people are so critical of Van Til. And if there's one thing people despise about Van Til, it's the phrase, God is one person and three persons. Number one, it's important to understand the polemical context in which he's addressing this. And in the background of what he was saying at that point is Gordon Clark and Gordon Clark's doctrine of God. So some background on this, you can watch some videos. I'll try to send you links. Maybe you can include them in the description or something, where Lane was lecturing down at Mid-America Reformed Seminary, not too far from us, and lecturing on this topic. It came up in the question and answer afterwards, from prompted by a question by Dr. Venema, and then Dr. Strange pitched in as well. It was a fascinating exchange. But Van Til is addressing the notion that God's essence is somehow impersonal,
Right.
and which is not the case at all because of the doctrine of perichoresis to which he alluded. All three persons of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, the hypostases, they fully and exhaustively indwell the essence. So there's no remainder. You ever seen this, diagram of the Trinity where you have three overlapping circles?
Yep.
That's a terrible diagram
Because
what
remainder,
what it promotes is that there's a part where the Son and the Spirit overlap, but the Father doesn't. And every combination therein. But there are also private parts of the hypostases that are not indwelled by any other.
Right.
We ought to reject any notion such as that. The only thing truly that the only item we may list that distinguishes Father from Son from Spirit is their mode of subsistence. The Father's unbegotten, the Son is begotten, and the Spirit proceeds from Father and Son. Now, the East won't like that, but we don't need to get more extravagant than that. But from there, we develop, with the doctrine of perichoresis, a fuller and richer understanding of the Trinity. So I believe that within Van Til's polemical context, he was correct. I agree with what he meant and what his teaching was when he said God is one person and God is three persons. At the same time, I believe it's confusing if you don't understand the context in which he wrote and that immediate context of that phrase, because people hear a person and they immediately substitute hypostasis, which is expected. God is not saying, or Van Til, there's a slip. Van Til is certainly not saying that God is one hypostasis, creedally speaking, and three hypostases, creedally speaking. That is just flat out incorrect, would be heretical. Van Til, what I believe is he's saying, and I think maybe a safer way to speak, which encapsulates everything that Van Til is seeking to promote. And I believe, I don't know the guy, but I mean, if he was here, I think he'd probably agree and would take this editorial point that God is one triunely personal God, or the triune personal God.
Yeah.
And that's what, we're going for with the title of this forthcoming book. We have three hypostases, Father, Son, and Spirit, who mutually indwell and exhaust one another, so that we have the essence of God and the three persons of God, but you can never speak of the essence without considering the three hypostases, and you can never speak of the three hypostases or any single hypostasis without fully invoking and understanding the other hypostases and the essence. The essence doesn't exist as a blank being only to be inhabited by three persons.
Yeah.
But neither do any persons exist to come to find their existence in the essence. God just is what he is. So his essence is, triunely personal. And that's why I like the word triune, because it emphasizes three and one at the same time.
Yeah.
That's the point.
It's a great word.
Equal ultimacy, I think, is what it's all about. And a healthy and robust doctrine of perichoresis, that's the mutual interrelation of the persons, I think that gets at it. Don't think, at the end of the day, don't think of three overlapping circles. Just, you can't conceptualize it really, but always and everywhere, one being, but yet three persons, but there's no overlap. I mean, it's full exhaustion without collapsing them into one hypostasis. There's always the distinction, and that's the great mystery.
Yeah. Well, and that it does not problematize, but it does make it a mystery. It does show it to be the mystery that he is. And I think a lot of times, social Trinitarianism, there's some really, really sharp dudes who write on that stuff, but it's often what you describe, that the divine nature is this abstract and it's instantiated three different times. And a lot of us go, well, how is that not tritheism?
Right.
And then others go, no, the divine nature is personal, but then somehow the three are less than personal. And you go, well, that's like partialism or something weird, man. I don't know. And so we want to say, I'm going to go equal ultimate, God is one, God is three. And it's a mystery, like surprise, surprise, like the whole church has always said.
That's what Van Til, one reason I think he liked the phrase concrete universal, which he was stealing or borrowing from Kant and from that tradition.
Yeah.
But he meant something very different by it, because we should never abstract the essence.
Mhm.
We tend to do that. And I believe a lot of Thomistic theology does this as well. I like Thomas on a lot of points. I'm not anti-Thomas,
Yeah.
but I appreciate much of his teaching on immutability, on simplicity. I have no issues with the conclusions of that theology. I think some of the aspects of his theology are severely mistaken.
Mhm.
That's an entirely different conversation. But
Yeah.
sometimes people like to say, well, Van Tillians hate Thomas, and therefore that's why so many Van Tillians, or at least some notable ones, sacrifice simplicity, or if they don't sacrifice simplicity, they sacrifice immutability, or if they don't do that, then they split God into an essential God and a covenantal God.
Yeah.
I reject all of that and think that that's a terrible way to approach the issue as well. And Van Til rejects that thinking too.
Mhm.
But we can't abstract the essence apart from the persons. And that's why we have a concrete universal, not an abstract universal, in the sense that the essence and the persons, they just are what God is. And he always exists that way. So it's concrete in the sense that it exists. You can't conceptualize him as an idea
Mhm.
apart from his actual existence.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we can't contain his existence to some historical particular, because he's transcendent and he's the necessary precondition
Yeah.
of everything that exists. So
Yeah.
I might be taking some liberties with my own interpretation of concrete universal there, but I think those are all, organic ways that Van Til thinks about the matter. And I think, for me at least, it's a helpful way to think about it too.
Well, and I know that language comes from, the post-Kantians, but
Yeah.
and a lot of people will, bemoan that, but it's helpful if you understand, once you understand concrete universal, you see like, oh, that seems like an antinomy if we want to keep with Kant stuff, but it's
Yeah.
helpful once you think through and you go, oh, okay, and it is talking about, it's still a mystery, but I can think of an abstract man without thinking of Camden. But
Yeah.
you ought not do that with God, because there is one God. There's not
Right.
a category of God who we can
Exactly.
try to fit through. And yeah, I think it's really helpful thinking through that. But when it comes to the perichoresis, something I've continually been wrestling through myself, and I just don't have time to really do it justice probably in my own mind. But can you affirm autotheos, that the Son is of himself? He didn't derive his essence or being from the Father, and still hold to eternal generation? Are those two, do they?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think you can. I think you need to.
Okay.
Because we never want to deny. I'm a full supporter of eternal generation of the Son.
Mm-hmm.
But there ought not to be some sort of chronological or essential logical, I don't even know the right word to use, in which the Son is subordinate to the Father in that regard. So there isn't a communication of essence in the sense that the Son is a donation. But I'm just gonna leave it at that and say that this is something that needs to be further thought. I think if I contemplate this question honestly and publicly, it could come back to bite me.
Right, totally. No, I hear that too, man. That's why I asked you the question, didn't try to solve myself.
No, but it goes to show the point. That's
right?
A tremendous question that is well worth investigating. Would not be surprised at all if I could, in 5 or 10 minutes, uncover several works that do address with the issue.
Yeah.
That I'm just not aware of off the top of my head.
Same,
but that's something that needs to be looked into, and I would love to read some treatments on that. Probably a good episode for you to have a guest on to talk about that, and maybe we can have one on Christ the Center as well.
That'd be awesome. Mm-hmm. Well, so just thinking through Rahner, I would think Rahner would say, because of insofar as we've interpreted him right here, that since the Son and the Spirit are communications of the Father, then that would preclude him from holding autotheos, and he doesn't care probably because that's a Calvinist doctrine, right?
Right. Wouldn't be an issue for him. Right.
But for us, we say, well, I don't want to hold to EFS. I think that if the Son is not autotheos, and the Spirit too, right? if he's not like God of himself, then that to me is opening the door. So then we have this tension of saying, well, I don't want to be a heretic or anything like that, but I do want to think through this stuff and hold it in tension and say, I don't know all of the answers until I can, think through, and maybe someday I will, maybe I won't, and I'll just have to hold that mystery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what tends to happen with the communication of essence is you end up with these logical priorities of the Father, then the Son, and then the Spirit. And what ends up happening when you do that is you end up with the Son becoming just a little bit lesser than God, because he derived his being, or we could say God the Father gifted a being to the Son, and without that gift, he would have nothing. And so even if it's not,
and the Father's underived, so it's like that's what we were going. Yeah, right.
But I think at least to bring us back to parameters for investigation, if someone were to investigate this more deeply, I think it's helpful at the bare minimum to be reminded that within our tradition, we understand those incommunicable personal properties, the unbegottenness, the begottenness, and the spiration, the proceeding. We understand those as modes of subsistence. I have no problem with that phrase, which you find in Thomas and in, you name it, many other places. Those are the modes by which the persons subsist in the divine essence. It's not as if those modes can change. We're not thinking here in modalism, but how does the Father subsist in the divine essence, which, remember, we can't abstract. So it doesn't exist out there and then this comes to be. But the Father exists as his mode of subsistence is unbegottenness, and the Son's is begottenness, and the Spirit's is a procession or aspiration, whatever word you prefer. Again, am I even answering a question? Because then that itself is a mystery. And that's what is worth investigating and looking into any further. It's not an answer to the question, but those are parameters that I would use as guardrails to go on attacking the question.
I love that, man. I'm so glad you brought up that language as well too. And that's the difference between theology and philosophy, or a difference. And you say, this is how he's revealed himself to us. And you go, well, spiration, like, what is the ontology of that? And you're like, dude, let's talk, but this is speculation. Let's be careful here. And I'm going to stay in these parameters because that's what he's revealed. And I don't want to go on beyond and cutting off corners to make it more conceptually easy for me.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed. And again, we have language like procession and spiration. We're not just inventing that to make the philosophy work out well. We're looking at portions of Scripture in which, these are good and necessary consequences from what God has revealed to us. So it is exegetically based, but we're not biblicists either. At least we shouldn't be. Where, well, the Bible doesn't use the word Trinity, so there must not be one. So you also, in my tradition, the Westminster Confession of Faith uses the language of by good and necessary consequence. There can be good consequences. We can think about Scripture and come up with good consequences from contemplating Scripture, but they might not be necessary. We're most interested in developing theology that is good and necessary. Like, these are things that could be, but also Scripture is demanding that they be. And so that's what we confessionalize. The good and necessary consequences. If it's merely a good consequence, maybe we can keep talking, but maybe we shouldn't let make our ministers subscribe to it.
Dude, wow, that's great. I've actually never heard someone split those two and say, yeah, good. And that's great. That's really helpful, actually, thinking through those two come apart.
Yeah, they ought to, because there's a lot of things that I think might be good ideas, but have they can we say they're necessary? And if we can't, then I might believe that might be the state of affairs, but I couldn't in good conscience be a member of a church that required subscription to things that weren't necessary. I just think that would be unreasonable.
And maybe don't make your whole podcast directed on this one good thing, right? Like, because that's the thing too. You get your hobby horse and you're like, this is a good idea. I'm tempted to that and saying, no, this is my addition to the field. I'm going to change my whole podcast towards this. Yeah. That's very helpful. Camden, this has been great. Do you have like 5 minutes to talk? I wanted just to touch at least on, maybe this is not possible, but touch on Rahner's understanding of transcendental Thomism. Because for those who are familiar with Van Til or even Kant, we did an episode on Kant, transcendentals. What is Rahner doing? Like, what does he mean by this? Why would he even take that Kantian language? For me, I'm like, why would he take that and not go the direction that Van Til went? But
right.
Are you able to explain that briefly? But
I'm happy to talk about it. I don't think I'm directly equipped to address this as well as I might like.
Okay.
But let's go. We'll see. Okay. So in a sense, this is kind of an historical point, and to try to understand the way that theology and philosophy go forth, historians often like to group people into schools of thought. It's easier that way. Mm-hmm. And so Rahner gets lumped into a whole historical category of thinkers of this type. And for better or worse, they've been called Transcendental Thomists. Mm-hmm. Rahner doesn't espouse that title. He was never a member of a club, that called themselves that or anything, but that's just how things are. So the basic reasoning for this, as far as I understand it historically, was in 1879, if my history is correct, the Pope required everybody, certainly every officer in the Catholic Church, to acknowledge that Thomas is in the official philosopher, the angelic doctor of the Roman Catholic Church. So you don't have an option. Like, if you are a priest in the Roman Catholic Church, you are a Thomist. You just are. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
Now that might be very limiting or restricting to people, especially more liberal theologians, modern theologians who want to transcend, and by that I'm just using that in a general phrase. They want to move beyond the limitations of this older traditional philosophy. Their theology is coming head to head. It's bashing up against the philosophy of Thomas. So they want to break through it, but they can't say that they reject it. Now, there's a second thing that happened in 1910. The Pope issued what was called an anti-modernist oath.
Okay.
In which every priest, all the way up until the 50s, I think, had to sign a document that basically said they were not modernists. And so you end up with these strictures. And the way that Catholic ecclesiology works, if you have to be in good standing, otherwise you're outside of the church. You can't go to another denomination. From their mind's point, there are none. That is the church.
Yeah, right.
You can't church hop in that sense, and it's kind of a good thing. But I mean, it leads to these other problems, because if you disagree with the philosophy or the theology, you have to find more creative ways to get outside the box. At the same time, acknowledging and giving your respects to the box.
Right.
And so it breeds it either breeds disingenuous confessional statements, that I subscribe to that, but then they don't really.
Right.
Or it leads to people entirely reconceptualizing the theology and not at all subscribing to what was intended in the first place.
Right.
So basically, this is what happened with Thomas. The philosophy was escaped, and modernism was rejected, while at the same time being embraced because of this this move to the subject that we have with
the substance was put into Thomistic language. The substance of modernism was
or vice versa. I mean that the Thomistic language was escaped by I like your way better. Yeah, basically. But I don't necessarily think that they're self-consciously introducing a Trojan horse.
Okay.
It's more of just a philosophical move in which now they're saying, well, we can agree to these things in on the surface, and maybe even to a degree in principle, but Thomas had no conception and certainly wasn't dealing with the advanced types of questions that started to arise in the in the mid to late 18th century.
Yeah.
And so you end up with, Kant's understanding of noumena and phenomena, which I think, led to a whole different way of approaching church councils and church statements. So when I read like Rahner's book, the Shape of the Church to Come, they, at the end of the Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council, each region, locale of the universal church was tasked with taking the constitutions and the dogmatic statements and applying them to their specific historical context.
Okay.
So it's like, this is what we've determined for the whole church. Now you all in Germany and, South America, you all figure out what this means in your time, your place.
Yeah.
And so they were called to instantiate these more universal truths for their own personal context. But
they're just contextualizing. That's their role. Okay. They know that.
But I think that Rahner, for one, and I think a lot of people like him, they recategorized and now have used some of the basic paradigmatic features of noumena and phenomena to understand all of the church's documents in the past. And this is what maddens Protestants, because we've come to modern Roman Catholicism and you'll look at dogmatic statements now and you can show in many places why the church's teaching contradicts itself from the past.
Right.
Now, normally you would just say, well, the church was wrong back then, but the Catholic Church can't and won't say that because of papal infallibility and that God would never mislead the church and the church is never wrong. We just have this other teaching, and then they try to find elaborate ways to harmonize. Rahner and Transcendental Thomists of this type have no problem recognizing legitimate inconsistencies or contradictions because these are all phenomenal instantiations of a noumenal eternal truth. So God can, in a sense, reveal his will to the church in 451, and he does it in the Council of Chalcedon. And the church was functionally the translator that translates noumenal lessons to phenomenal language. So you have the magisterium, the church functioning as that translator. They translate it, and you have the Council of Chalcedon of 451. But Rahner says explicitly, and perhaps his most famous essay, which is I'm going to get the title a little bit incorrect, but it's a Christology for an evolutionary view of the world. And it's in a bunch of different collections. He would say, I agree with Chalcedon 451 that it was infallible, that it was an ecumenical statement, but we need a new one for today. We need a new Christology for an evolutionary view of the world. By that, he's not just saying, let's take the lessons and contextualize them so that they're harmonious. He will even, I believe, what he's saying is that we need God to speak and reveal in and through the church to express and breathe into our present circumstances Christology for now. And for him, it's not a problem if the new Christological statement contradicts the old Christological statement, because that was historicized for then. There might be lessons from 451 that carry over to today, but we shouldn't be trapped by saying that that they can never contradict. He says they can just flat out, if you compare them side by side, they could possibly just not congrue, or they're not going to be congruent, but it doesn't matter, because you always have the eternal transcendent God whose word is always spoken in and through the church. The church can speak to its own context in different times and in different places, and it's infallible, it's authoritative when it speaks and to whom it's speaking. But as history proceeds and unfolds, it might need to speak a different word to different people.
Well, so that initially, the listener might think, well, that doesn't sound so bad. Systematic theologians say we need new systematic theologies for every generation because we have different milieus that we're speaking in. They wouldn't say milieu, but different contexts that we're speaking in.
Right.
But he's saying, no, the systematic theology would be different, and that's okay.
Well, it's also different from our view, because these are not just optional teachings. Like if the church declares something at an ecumenical meaning. Like this is on par,
Yeah.
maybe not directly, but it's on par with the Bible itself. We're
Right.
not talking about, well, this is so and so's formulation and present understanding of God's eternal truth. We're saying no, this is authoritative and infallible teaching,
Yeah.
and so you don't have an option to take it or leave it. Also, you end up with all sorts of other issues regarding the authority of the church and its very nature, and it just it's very problematic.
Yeah.
I'm just going to
Yeah.
stumbling over my words here because I could probably
Yeah.
say a million things.
Yeah. Well, so thinking back on the on Rahner's rule, and he wanted God. Well, depends on what he did want, right? That's a different question. But if God is in himself, in his ontology, in the immanent Trinity, if he is in the immanent Trinity, who he is in the economic Trinity, I'm not sure how you could have the noumeno-phenomenal gap, because the noumena is the phenomena, right? Like but how God has revealed himself in the councils, the old councils, is actually how he was. So unless you want to say that the noumeno is changing and needs to be reformulated, did, did he speak about this? Did he make sense of this? Or
No,
maybe this
I
isn't a
don't
problem.
think so.
Okay.
And when I'm reading in noumena and phenomena, those are not necessarily vocabulary words he's invoking.
Okay.
And so I'm always open to critique, but I'd be open to critique on this point. These are in large measure conclusions of what I'm reading and trying to make sense of how he understands how we can have a new ecumenical, how a Christology for an evolutionary view of the world could in any sense be an infallible authoritative teaching if it contradicts 451 Chalcedon, but for him, it's not a problem.
Yeah.
So, but, although he's not using the language of noumena and phenomena there, I still think, for Rahner, you can have that eternal communication of the Father in and through as the Son. I should even say the communication of the Father as the Son.
Yeah.
That's not until it comes to bear in time and space. It's not as if God is changing, because it's kind of a constant dynamic expression.
Yeah.
It's in that sense kind of almost Bardian in terms of its actualistic nature.
Yep.
But you wouldn't want to, bring in the phenomena here in terms of those categories.
Yeah. Dude,
of the critical subject.
That makes sense. It's the time and space. Once it gets into time and space, and it's a different time and space, you never step in the same river twice.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Okay, that's really good.
That's how I understand it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm mistaken, but
Camden, weren't you in like a Rahner society or something?
Oh my goodness. I joined the Catholic Theological Society of America for a time, and since my membership has lapsed because I hadn't been attending meetings, and it just ended up, I wasn't finding personal benefit in my circumstances have changed, so I wasn't able to attend the meeting. It just ended up becoming a bill I paid for no reason.
Yeah,
and so I decided, as in terms of a family budget, to let my membership lapse. I went to a meeting, and part of they have different subgroups under the CTSA. The CTSA is like America's one of their largest, Catholic theological learned societies. It's like ETS, but on a bigger, beef it up with Catholic theology and all this other kind of stuff. It's a helpful way to think. You go to meetings, their papers delivered, it's that kind of thing. But they also have these subgroups within the CTSA, different interest groups, and one of them is the Karl Rahner Theological Society. So I wanted to be part of that so that I could interact with other Rahner scholars and discuss and receive the journal that published its papers and all that sort of thing. And so being part of CTSA is kind of a prerequisite to being a member of the Karl Rahner Theological Society. And so I interacted with scholars in that regard. But I went to one of their breakfasts as part of the CTSA proceedings for that week. And it's just so stark. And I enjoyed it. The people were lovely. I had a lot of great conversations, but some people were giving presentations on Rahner's Christology compared to Hunser's von Balthasar.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about how von Balthasar was like too conservative in some of these other things. And I'm thinking, well, what am I if von Balthasar is so conservative? And then they started to just trash, and they just were exhibiting just disdain for the penal substitutionary nature of the atonement. I mean, they were angry about it, that it existed and that people would hold to such theology. And I just felt this fire just burning in my heart and in my belly. And I wanted almost nothing more. I restrained myself, but I literally felt like, and I had this thought at the moment, like I need to just stand on the table and just proclaim the gospel, because these people don't know what Jesus has done. They don't understand what's at the very center, the heart of what Christ has done for his people.
Right.
And that's what it is.
Yeah.
And, I let that pass over time. And, I can still interact with the folks if I have questions on Rahner and need to talk theology. I don't need to be part of the breakfast to do that.
Right.
But and I appreciate their charity toward me and kindness.
Yeah.
But it was an eye-opening moment for me, just to see how this isn't just a different branch of the Christian religion. To go back to what Machen said in his book, Christianity and Liberalism. Liberalism is not another type of Christianity. It's a different religion altogether.
Right.
And whatever they believe and whatever I believe, they're not in the same category.
Yeah.
I'll put it that way. Even though on the surface it might seem that way.
Well, I brought up the point because it's so instructive for us. It's instructive for us as Protestants, and instructive for us as Reformed folks, as Van Tillians, as Calvinists, because you were a preach. Well, you're in the OPC, and you were I don't know all the terminology, the head pastor.
No worries. Sure. I was pastor. I'm a minister. That's our office.
Minister,
so in the OPC, we hold to, some people are not going to like me saying this, but we hold to a 3-office view. You have ministers, elders, deacons. I view those as kind of concentric circles. And so, I still am a minister, but my call changed. So ministers can perform different or serve in different functions at different times. We have pastors, evangelists, and teachers. And do I think that that's a necessary consequence from Scripture? That might be one of those where, is that necessary? Maybe it's good, maybe it's not necessary, but it helps us function. So I was pastor, full-time pastor, preached twice on Sunday, did all the things that you would expect pastor to do. Yeah. But then when I started transition to work full-time at Reformed Forum, the church called me as an evangelist. So I'm still a minister. I'm still serving our church. I still serve on the session, except my day-to-day function's different. They don't pay me a salary. I'm paid by Reformed Forum, and I don't preach every week. I only fill in, when our pastor, our new full-time pastor is on vacation and needs someone to fill in, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, okay. So minister,
Yeah.
That's all helpful. So this is really instructive for us because you're an OPC minister, and the OPC guys go hard, man. You guys are like, this is what's up, and we're not the modernist PCA folks, you know.
No. Well, or PC USA. That's where I came from, as a kid. Yeah.
Well, I've heard a joke even about PCA, which is like they're brothers, right? But it's like, okay. But so you could
I'll let you tell the joke and not me.
Yeah. You could very easily be, look, we have it right, and this is what's up, and obviously everyone else is wrong. But instead, you say, yeah, I think we have it right, otherwise I wouldn't be a minister here. But I'm going to go find out what they say, and you join this society to figure this out, And I just think that's so instructive for us. If you want to critique someone, know what they say, read it, take the time, find out what those people say, and then still hold firm. Still critique it, but critique it knowing what you're talking about. And that's why I found that when I heard you talk about that, I wanted to share that story here because it's so instructive, and it takes a lot of work. You spent hours and hours writing and reading and talking with people so that you could write. And this is, they make you write like 100-page book, like it's short, but the amount of man hours that went into this is insane.
Oh,
but it's worth it. It's like we do need this stuff. So go out. I get crap for talking so much about simulation hypothesis. But I want to know
Bliss. Have you seen Bliss on Amazon?
No, I haven't.
Well,
I did Bliss. I saw it like 1 a.m. I couldn't sleep. Yeah. That was good.
So Owen Wilson and Selma Hayek. Yeah. I have my thoughts on that movie, but
yeah. I thought it was all right. Whatever. But I go in and I talk about this stuff because I want to know what do their poets say? What are they saying
Sure.
about this? And what do they really say? And how can we really critique this? And yeah, it's a silly thing, but the guys I disciple talk about it all the time.
It was enlightening to me as part of my PhD. Westminster does, and a lot of places do this, especially in the American system, which is heavy on coursework, whereas the European system is mostly you write a longer thesis or dissertation and you don't take courses, or at least you're not required to. Two of my courses had to be external courses.
Oh,
So
wow.
one I took at Temple in the philosophy department. It was supposed to be on continental philosophy, but when it was in the catalog, it looked like it was going to be kind of a survey. We're going to go through a bunch of different thinkers. And I was hoping we would deal with Heidegger, because Heidegger is a huge influence on Rahner.
Okay.
But it ended up being all on Foucault, which is now proving to be quite useful regarding critical race theory and the postmodern issues that are at stake within all that discussion. So I'm actually reaping benefits from that, whereas maybe there was a time where I was interested, but I was like, what am I ever going to use this for?
Right.
The other course, though, was a course on Karl Rahner at the Catholic University of America down in D.C. So I think it was every Wednesday for the spring 2010 semester, I would take the Amtrak from 30th Station in Philadelphia down to, what was it? Main Street, whatever, the main Union Station at DC, and then I'd catch the metro over to CUA, and I did that for a semester under a guy named John P. Galvin, not Calvin, but John Galvin, who was a very well-known Rahnerian scholar. So since I was doing Rahner and Catholicism at Westminster, I really felt it important to at least do an external with a world expert and learn all I could. If I couldn't go to a Catholic university, and I think it was wise that I didn't, and all told, for my personal needs, that I would at least do an external with Galvin, which I did. But that was utterly enlightening. I mean, my time at Temple was as well, but to go to a Catholic university to interact with Catholic scholars and to be sympathetic and not to shirk or hold back on my own thoughts, but to communicate in a way that was charitable, but also understandable to people coming from an entirely different viewpoint. That's formative, and I would encourage other people to do that insofar as they're able. But from their perspective, I mean, where I'm coming from is unheard of.
Right.
And when they found out I was Reformed, they say, "Oh, you're Karl Barth. That's Reformed, right?" And that by example is the closest they could get to any one of my heroes, other than Calvin. But Calvin is so early and prior to the Enlightenment that people reinterpret Calvin however they want.
Totally.
So I was like, well, more like Calvin. They're like, oh, but how do you read him? I was like, the way that he wrote. And, if I could go back and attend his church and just think the things he thought, I'd be pretty happy. And that just blows their mind. But that just goes to show we need more ecumenical interaction. I'm not huge on doing so for the sake of some grand ecumenical retrieval project. I'm not looking for reunion or anything, but we need to get out there and interact with folks and sharpen our understanding and seek to communicate that to the whole church and even to the or an apostate church if they're out there. That's just part of being a scholar. But often we want to sit in our own echo chambers, tell each other, how the ideas we already hold are great, and reinforce one another, and then cancel anyone that doesn't agree with what we think.
We all like doing that, and it's like you said, it's so much easier. It's so much easier to do that. Everyone just listen to me, and I will tell you everything that's right. And if you disagree, you're out. Yeah,
you got it.
Yeah. Well, dude, Camden, this has been so huge. Thanks for all the time. You're so busy. You got all this stuff going on. I really appreciate you coming on. One more time, can you plug, how can people find Reformed Forum?
The simplest way is just head over to reformedforum.org. That's reformed and FORUM.org. And from there, you'll find links to everything. If you want to get in touch, scroll to the bottom of the page and you can sign up for our email newsletter, or over on the side, you can get our print newsletter. But there you'll find all the courses, podcasts, publications, you name it. That's the simplest way. And also a contact form to get in touch with us if you'd like.
Okay, awesome.
Mhm.
And if you guys are interested in more Karl Rahner stuff, check out this book.
Yeah.
It's in the Great Thinkers series, and there's all sorts of footnotes too. So if you're interested in Karl Rahner, like, you can find the books you need in here. And Camden's been so nice. He's let me just pick his brain randomly here, but there's something different about reading it, and he spent all this time. I like to continually refresh my audience that when someone writes their dissertation, they're so deep into this stuff that to ask them years afterwards, hey, can you recall this for me? Is like, it's really nice that you would do that. So go buy the book and read the book. It's a good book.
Thank you. I appreciate the time, Parker. And, if people have any questions in the book, contact form is another way to get in touch. But yeah, let's keep up the conversation. This has been really fun.
Definitely awesome. All right. Well, this has been Parker's Pensées. We could talk about this more, Lord willing, someday we will, but that's going to have to do it for now. As always, all glory to God.